Neil made it. All right. How are we doing, folks? Got a couple people now logging in close to time. So let's finish getting set up here. And then we'll start our chat for the evening. Yeah, that's the document I had open earlier. That one that actually has my information. So let's see. There's another. Hopefully this won't crash. Say it's old school because it's new school RPG. In case you want to reference anything. So as I always say, on this particular interface that I'm using, I cannot see who enters the Twitch stream and who does not, who's viewing it and who does not. So feel free to pop in and say hi or chat if you are here, or say hello. I don't necessarily, I'm not one of those people that thinks, oh, if you're here, you have to talk. Feel free. Hey, what's up? How are you, Nikki? How's it going? I wasn't sure if you were gonna make it. I saw you were having some life stuff going on, so I didn't know if you were gonna make it on tonight. Glad you did. It's weird how it zooms it if I move it to a different monitor. Oh, okay. You learn something new regularly. So yeah, I saw something about that earlier. You're posting about your car. So I'll start with the usual spiel. Welcome. If you're watching this later, then welcome to anyone who comes in afterwards. And we will be, in fact, talking a little bit about magic items tonight. That's the big topic. We tend to have a topic every week and see how people are doing as far as getting in. We do, in fact, I do want to say that this is, of course, not an isolated stream entity object. If you have not, I think most people who are here and talking have already made an account and followed my channel. If not, please do so. The number of followers does actually increase viewership and standing and all that stuff. And this is becoming part of a larger effort in getting my own gaming material out there. So it's great if you could follow along if you happen to have YouTube or watch YouTube and want to watch videos on YouTube. Both these chats and later content. Then you can go over to YouTube. And go to my channel there. And that would be it. So it's from the tomes Fox and Board Games, and that's where you can go. And if you could, it would be absolutely wonderful if you subscribe to it. Somebody just subscribed to it. Look at that. Magic words. Speaking of magic items, right? I bring up the oracle of the internet and somebody appears and subscribes. So, yeah, it's a great help for me if you do. That helps expand getting these podcasts, these video casts out there. And eventually, this is going to be part of a larger effort in launching my own games, my own game company. And it was Wolfie. All right, cool, Wolfie. So, glad to see you again. And we will commence momentarily. Of course, I'm on all the major social medias. I'm not back on Instagram yet. I'll probably get the Instagram going again at some point in the future. But for now, of course, at Fox and Board Games, that's all one word. Then you can drop over there and subscribe to both Twitter and Facebook if you want to keep up on it goings on within my world. I had a great meeting this morning with three. In fact, I should send them the link. Three former students of mine who are very talented game designers. Some have an interest in video games, some in pen and paper, but they are in fact going to be hopefully producing some games. Well, they have produced some games. They're in the process of play testing some games that I also hope to publish alongside my own within the next year or so under Fox and Board Games. So that's pretty exciting. That's pretty exciting stuff. It's cool to have other people who are getting as invested in this as I am. And let me send this over there in case any of them want to drop in. Then we'll start our topical chat. Oh, make sure that's right. All right. So that's where we're at. Again, thanks everybody for coming. And I'm not just presenting flattery here. I am not just, saying this to placate anybody. These are not possible without viewers. So it's absolutely fantastic that people have become interested in this. In addition to the Wednesday night chat, this week I have been doing some other streams. A few people have popped in. They are work streams. I do this for a couple of reasons. The first of which is so that it kind of sets a schedule for myself for working on the game in a very focused fashion and some accountability while other people are watching me and asking me questions about my writing process. Monday, I worked on the map of one of the major cities of Tales of the Harrowed Lands, Nakarth, and that was a lot of fun because I actually had two artists pop in. Tom, Wendell Burke, who's usually here, and the artist that is currently producing the amazing illustrations for Tales of the Harrowed Land, Jeff Arsenault. Joe Arsenault, he popped in and we chatted a little bit about art and gaming and drawing, and that was really cool. So these are during the day, these are weekdays, and I've had very sporadic attendance. I've had some where I've had folks who are, dedicated and deep into it. Other people casually pop in and watch for a few minutes and go, and everything's great. Everything's cool. So I guess we'll start. Magic items. It's a big topic. There was already a cool text chain thread about magic items that Neil is on, that Curzon, who might pop on later. He's on there. I don't know if Blake's going to make it on tonight, but these are all the people I game with fairly regularly online and have known for many years in person. So we had a little chat about magic items earlier. And I usually kind of send these topics out to the couple gaming groups I'm on, or participants of games that I've been involved with to see what they think. So I guess the first real discussion is in the context of an RPG. What is a magic item, right? And this goes back to our discussion last week and 2 weeks ago as to how do we define what it is that we're actually talking about, right? 2 weeks ago we talked about the concept of races in RPGs. And what defines a race in an RPG? It's actually a misuse of the word race. You can go watch that chat if you didn't catch it and catch up on that. Last week, what is player agency? How do we even define player agency? Everybody had a different definition. And I know Neil and I have talked about this with our friend Blake quite a bit. Like, what do we define character development as? What do we define player agency as? These are all things that are actually very personal from group to group and even player to player, game master to game master. So we'll talk first. We'll think about that. What is a magic item in the context of an RPG? If you're just into RPGs, usually your first exposure to a magic item is, oh, there is perfect timing. There's Curzon. So yeah, my chat gets hidden by my text. My text sometimes OBS puts it in the background. Like 2 days ago when Blake and somebody else, I think Wendell, were telling me your mic's not on. Your mic's been muted, and I sat there talking for 10 minutes, and then I was like, oh yeah, my mic's muted. So let's talk about where this idea of magic items in RPGs comes from. It comes from mythology. It comes from world myth. It comes from our own legends. Excalibur, Thor's hammer, the arrows, or in some stories, darts of Vishnu, or Rama's bow from Indian folklore and Indian religion. The Ark of the Covenant, right? All these things that are relegated as the sacred objects of myth. A certain gold ring, a plain gold ring. I have the gold ring written here. So the gold ring is interesting because the legend of the gold ring actually comes from an older Norse myth that the ring had a very similar effect on the person who finds it. And he doesn't become goblinized like Gollum does, but he becomes corrupted and twisted. And it's the legend of the Lindworm, and the legend of the legend of Siegfried and his finding the gold ring and he was a blacksmith and he had this sword of meteoric iron that he was going to kill a dragon with, but in the meantime, behind a waterfall, this character finds a gold ring and they start to become corrupted, and that's actually what fed into the cycle. That's what fed into the ring cycle. So yeah, these were items that were unique. They were extremely powerful, and they weren't necessarily thought of as always beneficial. Or Squadron Bergonia, I'm just taking a quick look. So yeah, obviously sourced in the Nibelung Guide. Or what's it called in Warhammer, Neil? The Siegfried and Kriemhild. It was one of the stories of Siegfried. I'm trying to find the exact story of Siegfried from which it came from. Oh, but in any case, we can look at that later. Yeah. Ring of the Nibelungerlied. Yes, that was it. Nibelungerlied. That's it. That's what it's called in our Warhammer game. That's the musical that's capstoning this play, this festival that we're going to see. These items all had their own identity. The Golden Fleece, right? In every mythology, there are these objects that have power, often bestowed by a supernatural agent, dwarves, elves, a god, goddess, or possessed by a supernatural creature. God, goddess, elf, dwarf. And inevitably, once humans get a hold of them, they become dangerous and corruptive. And that's something that's very different than most of our experience with magic items from gaming. Not always, right? Because I think we've all had games where there are cursed items. But there is definitely this sense, a gin lamp, right? A gin lamp from Arabic folklore. It's not beneficial, right? The monkey's paw. These are all things that are not considered in these stories beneficial to the humans that come in contact with them. In fact, they're often different. They're often extremely dangerous. Mainly because they were sourced from the other world. They're tokens of the underworld. They're possessed by gods, goddesses, spirits, nature creatures. They're not meant for humans to have. So we then see this carry into the earliest fantasy literature. Sagas. So we'll talk about sagas first. There's skull sign. Alas, the gathering. Yes. Yes. We'll talk about the Skullstein. Yeah, we'll talk about the sagas. The Norse sagas where these become incorporated, Celtic folklore, otherworld mythologies where these stories then start to become a situation where humans get a hold of them and they become objects of power. But that's not actually till much later, till much longer than these stories were originally written and created. But let's then take it to literature. So, it's already been mentioned. The One Ring. The ring. A plain gold ring. An unassuming gold ring. That superficially doesn't seem to have... Okay, we're going to talk about that. Wolfie, you jumping the gun there, which is good. We're actually going to talk about technology as magic items. Right? A little preview. Is a lightsaber a magic item? If you or I found one, it would be. Right? If a primitive human, by primitive I mean non-industrialized. I don't mean intellectually primitive, because I don't believe early humans were any less intelligent than we are. And in fact, current events usually tells me that they were probably more intelligent in some ways than we are. But what is a magic item and how do they function? Okay, so not only do we have the One Ring, which is similar to the ancient magic items found in folklore, forged by a magic smith for what is essentially a god, an evil demigod, Sauron. It corrupts everything it touches. Somebody once said to me, a student once said to me, kind of sarcastically, joking around, well, it's just a ring of invisibility. Like, what real power does this thing have? Its power, the internet is literal magic. We taught rocks how to do the math. Yeah, exactly. The real power of the One Ring is its ability to capture human greed and focus human greed and human ambition, or dwarvish ambition or elvish ambition, and corrupt it to its master. That's what the power of the One Ring is. And in that way, and it was, again, forged by a mythological creature, owned by a demigod, and it was a case where humans were never really meant to have it. But it was given to them with ill intent. In that way, it's much more like a djinn's gift, or it's much more like an elven, or a gift of a fairy, something like this. Whereas Excalibur was, let's say, Excalibur in Arthurian folklore originally, well, it originally never even appeared in Arthurian folklore, but that's a whole other debate. At least not in the form that we know it, but it was a sign of rulership, much like Aragorn's sword. It was the owner that was powerful and magical, and their presence is effectively what powers this magic item. But then we take a look at Sting, right? Frodo's sword. That's the closest we get to a D&D magic item from traditional fantasy. It's this sword that is extra sharp, and creatures of the dark fear it, and it glows blue when they appear. So in stories are narrative devices. So MacGuffins and rewards. This is what I'm getting at there, Curzon. That these were narrative devices, and they were often cautionary devices. Let's take a look at Elric. Let's take a look at Stormbringer. One of the coolest magic items ever. This magic sword that this prince of this fallen, degenerate land, this weakling, this albino, this sickly child, once he gets a hold of Stormbringer, the demon that lives in the blade of Stormbringer gives him power, gives him magic powers. But he has to continuously kill and spill blood with Stormbringer to retain these powers. He becomes basically a vampire, channeled through this demonic sword. Again, that's a lot closer to the items we see in folklore, the items we see in mythology. Stormbringer has its own agenda. Right, Stormbringer is sentient. Stormbringer and Moorblade really turn the views of magic on its head. Right. When you first read that in your teens, like I did, and you're used to Tolkien, you're used to playing D&D, and then you read about Stormbringer, and you start going, oh, this is what a magic item can do. So that's a good question there, Skullstein. Is it a magic item or a sentient being masquerading. I believe it was actually defined by Moorcock as a sentient being entrapped in a magic item, entrapped in a blade. But the blade itself was indicated to be special. It was indicated to have been crafted for this purpose. So that's a good point. But let's look at some of the lesser items that we see, let's say, in Lord of the Rings. The rope of the elves of Lothlorien. The elves didn't think it was magic. Is there a distinction, though? That's a good question, Wolfie. I don't know. Is there a distinction? It's a fine line. It's a fine line. The elves didn't think Waybread in the rope was magical. Or the cloaks of Elvenkind, which is what we call them now because of D&D. No, right. Items possessed of spirits or souls is not a new thing. And it's not... No, and it wasn't particularly common. Waybread was definitely magical, but the elves didn't consider it magical. It was just bread to them. It was just what they ate. It was just elvish stuff. In fact, I think at one point, one of the hobbits are asked if it's magical, and they say it's elvish. Or the elves say, oh, it's elvish. Yes, it's inherently magical because it comes from the elves. But it wasn't framed as a magic item. The dagger of Arnor that kills the Witch King, that Pippin takes from the Barrow-wight. Is it an inherently magic item? Or is it the lineage of the kings of Arnor, the fallen kings of Arnor, that this represents that's able to kill the Witch King? These are all things that, they've come to form what we think of as magic items. In D&D terms, the daggers of Arnor would have been +3 daggers, double damage against wraiths or specters or, incorporeal undead or whatever. That's how we could define it. That's how we could define it it does not kill the Witch King. It distracts the Witch King. So Yowen can kill the Witch King. One of the most important parts of the entire trilogy. But yes, so it was able to harm the Witch King because it is this dagger of Arnor. So, Curzon wisely says, for all we know, could have been made of a particular metal. So that's implied. I think that's actually implied in a lot of the apocryphal material that the kings of that time made these blades that were special, superior. And of course, it was the counterbalance to the Morgul blade. Right? It's the juxtaposition of this blade of this kingly line that destroys this servant of evil, the head of the ring wraiths. But it does so because it was crafted with the exact opposite intent as the Morgul blades, which are these extensions of the ring wraiths. So there's a lot there. There's a lot going on there, light and dark. And again, Tolkien's also very black and white. Unlike when you get to Elric and you realize that nobody's good and evil, they're all a little evil. They all will do something that's noble, but they're much more like real people than maybe some of Tolkien's characters. So let's talk about magic items in RPGs now. So what are they? Yes, they're rewards. They're MacGuffins. They're things that move a story along or that players want to make themselves more powerful. Are they the alternative to technology? Right? Are your goggles of seeing or whatever, okay, your boots of swimming or climbing, are they the substitute for tech? Depending on the game. They can be used as plot drivers for a campaign. Absolutely. My Tales of the Hard Land, the entire advancement campaign, the entire MacGuffin was this cursed mask. Which was, of course, a lot closer to some of the mythological stories of magic items than it was a reward. Even though, of course, Blake insisted on using it, which, of course, we all knew he would. And we all know what happened. So, but that fits for that game. It's a dark sword and sorcery game. Again, it's closer to Conan or Hyperborea or Moorcock than it is D&D. Magic is the stand-in for tech. I would argue that in D&D, Pathfinder, all these games, even if, say, the original versions of the games had them as these mythic constructs, they became utilitarian, right? They're technology that's powered by an energy we don't understand. Right, as famously Arthur C. Clarke said, any advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. So Eberron, I was just going to bring up Eberron versus Hyperborea, right? So how does magic in Eberron versus... We hear very little about magic items in Hyperborea. in Conan's world. It's all about the people that wield them, and the power. I mean, even Tulsa Doom's ring, which is ascribed some power, it's only because Tulsa Doom's wearing it. It doesn't have any inherent power. High magic versus low magic. I mean, I think this goes even further. Eberron quite literally is technological power. It's clockwork, borderline steampunkish, powered with magic. So I don't know. Like Curzon, what do you want to share about that? Because I was actually had Eberron listed as one of the things to talk about. So we were talking about this a little bit earlier, Neil. Numenaria, there's science fantasy, ciphers are tech that are so advanced. So this gets so into this blending of magic and science. And again, now we can look at something like Shadowrun, Numenera, which I've only looked at a little bit. I know we've talked about it over the years. And I think I looked at one of the early versions of it. They might as well be magic. So this goes back to my first question. Like, is a lightsaber a magic item? To your average peasant in Star Wars, they see a Jedi with a lightsaber, they might as well be Gandalf with glam drink. Literally, they might as well be this figure. Everyday laborers. So right, D&D, it's very common. And now, if you've played D&D with me extensively, Blake isn't here to pick on me. But I'm really magic stingy. But even in more recent versions of D&D games I've run, you can go to the market and buy healing potions. Right? I mean, these are considered these kind of common... I don't know. Are they magic? Like, are they magic, or do you want to describe them as being made with specific skills that allow that level of healing? Obviously, a potion that raises somebody from 0 to 80 hit points is probably magical. No, Shadowrun doesn't have a lot of magic items, right? Foci. Yeah, foci and weapons. So I think what I'm also curious about... Let's see. So what do you mean by that, Nikki? I mean, I have a loose definition of hard and soft magic, but I'm curious to see what you think of, because you also play different games than a number of people who stop in regularly. Right. So like sci-fi, yeah. So like sci-fi, where the a hard magic system has to have some sort of systemic grounding. There has to be some sort of explanation as to where it's sourced, how it works. Whereas a soft magic system, there is just this general acceptance that it works. Yes, yeah. Lord of the Rings is soft magic. So would we say like the most popular games, D&D and Pathfinder, are they more or less soft magic? Right? Everybody knows if you have a +1 sword, it'll hurt a werewolf or whatever, a magic creature. But no one really cares as to why this exactly works. We just all accept that it does. So I actually have a note about that. Should magic items D&D is a hard magic, the characters of the world, in that they have a from the character perspective, they have an almost scientific understanding of magic, if I'm reading that correctly. Or at least mages do. Right. Yeah. Familiarity, at least mages do. So would we say that soft magic functions transparently? Is that our definition? So Wolfie points out if you want to find out, it gives you opportunities for exploration, research, and character and adventure. Right. Scientists and engineers in our world understand that. But that's my other question. Like, is magic now too casual in many games, right? Is it that there's no lineage to items? That there's no inherent mystery about magic items? That's why I say, like, is it closer to technology at this point or transparent technology? And this has been always one of my issues with everybody walking around with +4 plate mail and a plus 2 sword, that they become factor modifiers versus actually they miss an opportunity. I feel they miss an opportunity to tell part of the story of these games and these worlds. Now you could argue with me that even in D&D there are artifacts, right? But again, even the artifacts are very defined. Well, there's some other discussions of other systems that went on earlier on my one text chain, and that I know people here have brought up. What are your experience with those games? So Earth Dawn. So let's talk about that. Earth Dawn was a brilliant game. I only read a little bit of it when it came out years ago, and I thought it was so good, and I never really followed up on it. Take the time to learn about the history of the item. All right, cool. How much investment on the part of the player does that take? Because again, I think now we're going to start to verge back into last week's territory of a casual play experience where you just know your +2 sword will do this versus, oh, wait, I have to actually spend the time as a player and as a game master to develop the environment in which this weapon does this or item does this. Yeah, so it's an interesting thing, Wolfie, because it took a bit because they had to use gamer resources to get the bonuses to attach. So I've actually seen that a lot more, Neil, in terms of video games where these guaranteed it's all mathematical and still always amounts to altering game environments and game effects, but at the same time I've seen a lot more video games where you can kind of modify a magic item as you go along with it, and you have to use in-game resources. There might not be as strong of a narrative element, but it's been there. So Wolfie says lower magic items are just too common a lot of the time. Let's roll down to the magic shop and pick up a new +3 dagger. Right. Uh but does that have a place in certain types of games and in certain worlds? And then at what point do we define how it's magical or why it's magical? There's Paige. What's up, brother? No problem being late. Glad you made it. Hope you're doing all right. So, do you want to talk about that system? I mean, you said it's very simple, but feel free to talk about it. And this is for D&D, correct? 5e. Okay. And you have tiers in play, right? Because again, we've talked about D&D a lot, and that's one of the things that defines it. And Pathfinder, that it's tier based, it's level based. So that's really interesting. And I think that says something, Curzon, about how we treat these things. I tend to make, even with the most recent group, let's see this piece of guy here. Minor, major, legendary boons at specific level points. Cool. So is that part of character advancement then? Could be a thing. What if it has special properties? Like, so are you using, let's say, a figurine of wondrous power, and you assign it a boon level? Advances with, so the character has. What if the character loses it? What if they're without it for a period of time, or they forget it at home? I mean, I don't know if that'll really happen, but I'm just kind of throwing out ideas to try to. Well, see, I think Wolfie and I are on the same page. Like, what we really want is a story that goes with the item, even if it's a +2 sword. Why, where, how did it get that way, right? Like I talked about the daggers of Arnor before. Like, it was the lineage of their creation that made them magical in the world. Right. Yeah. And I mean, obviously, those are the kinds of things we figure out when we play. And you know, so it comes. So third edition, 3 and 3.5 introduced the idea of mastercraft items, masterwork items, which I really loved because you could get a masterwork item that you had to travel to this special blacksmith to get or even find, and it's +3, but it's +3 because it's been crafted really well and it's not inherently magic. And then when you find the magic item that can strike the wraith or whatever, it becomes that much more special. So, and I have done that in 5e as well. I have in fact kept masterwork where it gives you the combat bonus because that's what you want as a combat bonus, but it's not necessarily like finding an actual magic item that does something really unique. Now, I have also been pretty well known to give mundane seeming magical items additional properties people don't know about until they do something to unlock them. So, right, true masterwork should be pretty rare too. Right, think of real Toledo steel, made in Toledo, Spain in the Middle Ages. Even what we call Toledo steel now does not necessarily, unless it's made by a master smith, stack up to it. Same thing with katana blades, right? Like, okay, so you're taking, we talked about that a little bit early on, more of the artifact approach of this mythological item. Because I discussed that originally our idea of magic items comes from mythology. Yeah. Well, but let's talk about this in an historical context. Yeah, Achilles, right. Yeah. It's made in Ohio. So yeah, exactly. Now it's made in Ohio, so it's Toledo steel. Cucullian off the farm. So I was also just thinking about the Uthbert swords that were found all over Scandinavia and modern Europe because there was the smith, who we assume his name was Uthbert, his one was Uthbert, who had made these really, really well crafted swords. And everybody who was anybody in the ancient Scandinavian world wanted that Uthbert sword. So what started happening? All these lesser fake Uthbert swords started showing up. And it's really kind of funny because it's kind of like your first case of like brand name knockoff that we know of or celebrity knockoff. Like, well, I'm sure there were cases before that in other cultures, but it's just funny because it's like, okay, so all your daggers might be +1, but which one is really the elven magic dagger? Fake Gucci swords, exactly. It was literally like that. So this noble would walk into your court and he'd have an Uthbird sword and everybody would be whispering, "Oh, I bet he got that at Joe's blacksmith up the street." Right? It's hilarious in a way because you're like, "That's really funny." Subject to all the same vanities and all the same issues we have. Yeah, Dolce and Gabbana remark. Yeah, same kind of thing. And it's hilarious because originally they found a few and they're like, "Oh, that's pretty cool. This guy was a really famous blacksmith." Then they found so many that they were like, "All right, like most of these are fake." Like, there were only the few that were these really renowned swords historically. So is that your plus one magic item that you buy at the market in D&D, right? Is it like just the shadow of an actual magic dagger? The Yoruba knife of D&D. So let's continue this conversation and talk about different games and different systems. What roles do the items play? Not just how do they different mechanically. Let's talk about Call of Cthulhu or any horror game. Do you really want magic items? Do you really want an artifact? And I understand there's some more modern games where yes, there's a dagger that will kill Shoggoths or whatever. But taken out of the context of some of the more modern game, right? How psychotic is your character at the time? Well, and that's what's interesting is when we started the Call of Cthulhu game, several people asked for magic abilities and items, and I gave them to them. And they regretted it later. They really regretted it later. And of course, that was intentional on my part. Yeah, exactly. Right. You find the coffins, and in that one game I ran, and they actually took you to the far flung places around the globe, including ghoul warrens with night gaunts and other hunting horrors and other horrible things living in them, which you don't come out of alive. But yeah, so the transporter coffins, and that's interesting. So I have transporters here as a note. The transporter coffins were effectively Call of Cthulhu magic items. They allowed the ghouls to go from one carnal place or one underground place to another, even bypassing their extensive warrens. And of course, once humans decided, hey, let's get in these and see what happens, the campaign went totally off the rails. Yep, M32 rotary grenade launcher, yeah. And a knife hand to drop the mountains of madness. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, your idea of a magic item there is a little different. But in Earth Dawn, so what's the role, the social role of these magic items in something like Earth Dawn? They're treated very casually in D&D, like especially in Eberron or even in Forgotten Realms, through utilitarian devices. Now, has anybody ever been in a game where there are too few magic item opportunities? I think a lot of the people who popped in tonight are of a very similar mind as to how they want their games to run narratively. But did you ever have a party or a situation where you thought, "Oh yeah, we should have more magic items," or the GM's not giving us any magic items? That's a different thing. Like that's looking at magic items as the reward system. I mean, that's Diablo, basically, right? Which, of course, is old school D&D in computer game form. Right, and if you go to Hyperborea, this idea of magic is only the Stygians use it. But did you find that less satisfying, or more satisfying, or did you? Yeah, filthy snake worshippers. Well, I say this that my current D&D group, what blew me away, and again, they all come from games from a different perspective. They come at it from a much more narrative. They come at it from video gaming and movies and books versus old school D&D, and I'm absolutely blown away by how much they don't care about loot or magic items. Like they really like it is not the focus of their gaming. It is not the focus of Their advancement leveled the playing field in combat. That's interesting, you know. I always found as a player and as a game master, it was really cool when players weren't loaded down with magic items, characters weren't loaded down with magic items, and then they actually managed to get through an encounter, you know, and it's pretty cool. Like, all right, they don't have a javelin of lightning, but they managed to take out that horde of ghouls or whatever. I think 5e has balanced magic item use. That's why, you know, I do occasionally throw in a weapon. And by the time they reached fourth level, I kind of made sure everybody had at least one magic weapon because I wanted to start throwing things at them that couldn't be hurt, that had resistance. Right. So that was one of the cool things I did like about fourth ed is that it brought in character refreshing character feats that were almost or abilities that were almost magical powers in and of themselves. I also tend to mutate the way magic items appear. Like even if something is a gem of seeing, maybe I'll put it in another device or another object, or I'll give them something else that mimics a gem of seeing mechanically, but there's a reason why it's there. Oh, alchemy jug's great. It's great. Yeah, it's hilarious, and it's the party has a lot of fun with it. And I did give them a chance, so I took out mayonnaise because I thought mayonnaise was silly. But I did take out mayonnaise. I put in something else. I think I put in a very minor potion, and the number of times they've been like, let's just do this once a day. You know, we can sell the wine or drink the wine, or maybe we could just use the potion. And it's really funny to see them play with this alchemy jug and be so invested in this alchemy jug. Well, joking around and in a reverent fashion on our chat list before I brought up the bag of beans and the bag of tricks. Right? Those are some really unique. Could be a bag of something else too. Lube the stairs to. So I've always kind of wondered. First of all, I always wondered if in any medieval analogy there was mayonnaise, and I've never bothered to research it. Like to me, mayonnaise was that kind of disconnect where I'm like, mayonnaise in a medieval fantasy world. I mean, maybe there was mayonnaise. I guess if there are dragons, there could be aioli. Call it aioli. Yes. Well, and that's the other thing. So I've never had a problem. If they have eggs, it can make mayo. That's true. That's true. I'm sure there's an historical precedent of a sauce which mimics mayonnaise, and I know enough cooks who have had actual medieval history and studies and cook authentic meals. I should ask them. But I always thought mayonnaise was a weird thing to put in there. But yeah, that's true. We could use it to trip orcs when they're coming down the stairs. But so that's the other approach that you can certainly take is if people want Cristiano probably no, absolutely. We're done with match games. Well, right, and sometimes you give magic items as a way to test or break parameters too. But like Wolfie says, the other option is sure you can have that +4 sword and armor, but something inevitably is going to be out there that is going to be so destructive you're going to need it. My rule was always, at least in D&D, if it's a really rare, powerful magic item, there's someone out there that's going to have it that you're going to have to take it from. And if it's a weapon or item of any sort, they're going to use it on you. Or they're going to try to use it before you get it. So that was always kind of the way I handled it. Like, I never thought, oh, you find a rod of the Magi just sitting there, in a treasure trove. I mean, unless it's an ancient red dragon. And if the PCs have it, somebody else might want to take it. True. So even in the context, of the games or worlds. Okay, I was just getting to that. How about non-magic items or non-weapon, or how about non-weapon items? Okay, no, actually, I was thinking of doing something. The elephant theory of game mastering. I probably have heard it, but I'm not overly familiar with it. So, go ahead and hit me. So, just while Peach gets to that, as far as non-weapon items, I mean, I'm a big fan of non-weapon items because they can be really cool and special. Like again, I kind of made sure that people from that's probably where I read it years ago. Launching image. I tend to like make sure players have enough that'll benefit their character and that it will survive. Though I agree with in fifth ed, it's not as big of a deal as it was in earlier editions. But I think what's really cool is when they find the rope of entanglement, or the rope of climbing, or the boots of elvenkind, because they do treat it like it's like a special thing. And in fact, players will often sit. I'll have them describe like what it looks like, how it feels, and what makes it different. Like, why is it cool? Oh, right, right. So I think we talked about that years ago, dropping like an armored hovercraft on a player. I think we actually had that discussion, where the guy was so decked out in every bit of cyberware and body armor he could find, and the only thing left is just to drop the HAV on him or something like that. It was like, okay, so they are exclusive. So again, that has an interest to me, Neil, that these games do become, or these objects in that game do become relics of something else and symbols of something else. And to me, that's where magic items become extremely interesting. Right. The GM can never run out of elephants. That's always kind of the, and that's kind of like when I read about people saying about encounters being way too easy in these games. Now, guaranteed, fifth ed, it's pretty hard to kill a character, but yeah, invisible, yeah, paratrooper trolls, exactly, solves a host of problems. I'm like, I can always add another monster. Like I don't understand why you're a slave to you can get some elephants. So how about in Fate? Because I know you're a fan of Fate, Nikki. How about Fate? How are items treated in Fate? Like I remember the hero system, they're effectively treated as augmentations to the character. There's less interest in you find an item and it does something for you, but you have Captain Marvel's shield or something like that, where it's such an inherent part of the character, it's factored in character development and it becomes this tool, but it's unique to that character. That's kind of funny, Wolfie. That's interesting. So it turns it into an actual map option. Electro claws in her hands like a zap during combat, but it was part of her character, right? So again, the concept of the character dictated an item that she possessed. Yeah, and that's what's kind of cool. Okay, and that makes sense. Is there an option in that game to find items? Does it matter? I know it's a much more narrative system. I know Neil's a little familiar with it too. Is it something that matters? Right. And that's what I was gonna say, Wolfie, is that sounds almost like it was playing with this is actually technology. So did you have was it a cell phone? Was that, or a mobile phone? Is that what this mysterious box was? So you can build items, you can get items. Okay. So items do factor into it. I'd be curious to see how they function in a game like that. Temporary aspects. Okay. Well, right. Like if you found a cell phone and these spirit voices started talking to you out of it, right, in a fantasy realm, and you had no idea where these were coming from. All right, at that point, it's a magic item. It's not. It doesn't function like we have our mobile phones and we have this very distinct idea of how it works. So this goes back to one of the original statements that we touched on in terms of preconceptions. I think this has been great as far as kind of covering the ground that I was interested in covering. And again, I'm just going to go over to my DMG that I have here open. Random magic items, right? I mean, so bag of holding, right? I mean, is that something you give just to be nice to your players? I mean, I do. Helmet comprehending languages, mariner's armor. Like, these are all things that serve a function that are utilitarian. They allow you to shortcut the game. Like, this is kind of a discussion I had in terms of magic in general. So this is kind of what I was gonna say in terms of the function of items. So we understand how they function, right? But in the context of their own game universe, is a transporter in Star Trek or a lightsaber that world's version of the magic item? When you first saw A New Hope, like some of the people here who, are of the age to have seen it, and Ben Kenobi pulls out that lightsaber, and you just sat there, because for all purposes, for the intent of the viewer, and probably for Luke, it was like it was like Merlin pulling out Excalibur. It's the exact same situation. And in fact, we know it was quite literally, or perhaps a samurai master pulling out a sacred samurai sword. It has that maybe more of that analogy. But are these the magic items of those worlds? And yes, okay, we presume that somebody in that world understands the technology. And if you remember Expedition to the Barrier Peaks, the old first ed D&D module, where what the cave that the characters are actually adventuring in is a crashed spaceship, and they find laser guns. I mean, I think we could say that, yeah. So, yeah. And again, and I'm not surprised, of course, Russell, that we're on the same wavelength as this, because we're pretty much on the same wavelength with most things of this nature. So, so that's very true. Like, transporters were invented in Star Trek to save money during shooting, right? So you didn't have to have a travel to every destination. Does that make magic items a savings device in fantasy games? So I would argue, I was asked earlier when I was talking about one of my daytime chats about magic and the way magic works and what it's really about, is in a way it's about shortcutting the system, right? It's about taking a shortcut within a system, either numerically or in terms of scenes or narration. And I would argue that they were something that most magic items are in effect a savings device, and we could get into savings in terms of different functions within the game. So true, automatic doors were first introduced. People freaked out. So I remember the first time I saw somebody on a laptop when I was in grad school, sitting at the tech desk, surfing the web with no wires connected to it, I thought the guy was pulling my leg when he said he was on the internet. Because this was the first time I ever encountered wireless internet. It was 2001, maybe. And it was only because I was in a school that was rather affluent for graduate school that they had wireless internet there. But to me, it was quite literally fantasy. The first time I saw a photographic print develop off a blank piece of paper when immersed in developer, it looked magical to me, you know? So again, we go back to that discussion of science and magic being indistinguishable past a certain point. Well, right. Computers are basically rocks we've infused with electricity so that they do math. And in a way, it is crazy. It's crazy that someone ever figured out that could be done. So let's see. There's still narrative. Right, teleportation magic helps the story, helps move the story along, and that's what I mean in terms of it shortcutting, right? That it doesn't necessarily shortcut the system in that it gives you an advantage in combat or kills a bunch of opponents you normally have to fight. It can also help magic, and magic items in particular can help as a shortcut. And I know Curzon wanted to talk about magic tonight broadly, or that we should talk about magic, but I think that's even bigger. That might be a two-parter. A 2 or 3-parter. But I thought magic items might be a good way to approach it. Next week, we'll see what next week brings. EPT tube cars. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Tube cars are, the first time you see something like this. So Wolfie shared his coolest one of the coolest magic items he encountered. What's the least cool magic item anyone's ever encountered in a game? Where you were like, really? The game master gave this out to somebody? Leaving out the Book of Erotic Fantasy for 3rd Ed, of course. We should have a whole podcast just on that. It's a real book. Might still be available on Amazon. It's just as bad as you think. Yeah. What's the worst magic item that you've encountered in a game that you've been given as a player? Or maybe that a player came up with? Well, the bag of noxious fumes. Yeah, that's just awful. That's rather funny. It'd be funny to me as a game master. See, what's funny is the cosmetic magic items I don't have as much of an issue with as long as they're treated as extremely minor. Me, my pants? Yeah. Yeah, was it modeled after someone at the game table? Exactly. I find cosmetic items are really fun for role playing purposes. So, one of our players, Lauren, Norl, her character, her name spelled backwards, she has a cosmetic pet. Let's see, the Necroscum campaign, Shadowrun. License plate on the truck that changes. That's actually pretty cool, though. Because in Shadowrun, if you're doing something awful, yeah, if you're doing something, if you're doing something what you do in Shadowrun, which is break in someplace, that's actually pretty cool. But it's also useful. So Lauren has Blood Drinker, and what Blood Drinker is a bear about the size of a cat that her character came with because she had found it in another game. She had played the character in one other game before mine, and she found this miniature bear that had been shrunk by goblin magic. And she's so in love with this bear, she wanted to keep it for our game. And it's totally cosmetic. It's I think I talked about it in another game. But it's a mini bear, and she does things like she at the tavern, she plays her lute and puts it on the table and it dances. And we made it clear up front. I said, okay, the bear has no combat ability, right? The bear has no way to. Yeah, you'd probably get along really well with Lauren. Actually, there's no way for this bear to affect the story besides just role play and have fun with it, right? She's like, no. I'm like, okay, so it's effectively a cosmetic pet, like in World of Warcraft or Diablo. It's just like something there. And I think it's fun to have this, and I did have it taken from her when she got taken prisoner by the evil Knoll demon cult, and of course, she was upset that I was really going to off her bear, and her bear is a totally, unless she did something really dumb, I wouldn't just. Yeah, loot boxes and RPGs. Okay, well that's definitely a possibility. I wouldn't. Yeah, it has narrative immunity. The bear has narrative immunity. I wasn't really gonna kill the bear, but I strung her along, and then when she found out the party's evil nemesis, the halfling bard, had taken her bear, she was so upset because that was the whole thing. She had challenged this bard to a contest, and she got more people giving her money and popularizing her because of the bear than him. I mean, he was chaotic evil before that, but that was kind of this whole overarch was this stupid bear and this halfling bard that overarched this entire campaign, but. That's a case of it's effectively a magic item. Yes, it's a bear. I know it has feelings. It's a living thing. It's cute. But it's effectively a cosmetic item. But it has added so much role-playing opportunity. Because when things need tension breaking, Blood Drinker comes out. And that totally... And again, in my world, my current D&D game, it's not as hardcore and low magic as I often run them. Magic is not super common. But as I said, they can go to the Wizards Guild and sometimes buy a scroll, or they can go. There's one magic shop in the major city, which everything there is extremely rare, powerful, and expensive. And I don't think they've ever actually purchased anything there, but their first job was to transport something there, and that's how they got into the city. So again, that's where a place where I do, and the group wants stuff a little bit more fantasy. They want it a little more high fantasy. So I've played it up a little more high fantasy. Versus a lot of my long-term D&D games, which were very Tolkien low fantasy. Right. Right. It's technically an artifact figuring a wondrous power. So Wolfie, yeah, I kind of agree. Like I think if these things are treated too casually, then they're not cute and fun. And it's like, oh, I have a mirror that automatically puts my makeup on. All right, that's cool if the player wants it, but it doesn't really make it special. Drizzits, yeah, that's true. Okay, yeah. So right, that was a figurine that was extremely powerful, like above and beyond the average magic item. But then again, we were also dealing with this really epic heroic character. The bag of noxious fumes. Yeah, I think that wins for the worst magic item. The bag of devouring was always really particularly evil to me. I was just like, wow, there was some game master with really had no mercy. Sure, it acts like a bag of holding for 2d3 weeks or whatever. Then it eats your items. Then it just eats anything that's in there, and you're like, wow, that's pretty hardcore. I have been known to give out swords with intelligence and alignment, or weapons with intelligence and alignment, fairly regularly. Not regularly, but every now and then. And then eventually the player starts realizing strange things are going on when they use this sword, or this weapon. And it's a little bit Elric, but it's never as, Black Razor appeared in White Plume Mountain. That's basically Stormbringer. In fact, it's exactly Stormbringer. And yeah, the player who ends up with that ends up turning chaotic evil and, creating massive terror with it. The Holy Avenger, the Staff of Power, and again, I think all those things need to be attached to some sort of narrative and mythic lineage. I mean, I think I had the players find a Staff of the Magi once, but it was part of an actual long-term quest, and they found it in this crypt. So there was a reason for it. So okay, you can be our TikTok liaison. I don't think the rest of us are cool enough to be on TikTok, but great idea. Has with the barbarian and their axe. All right. Was the axe bound to them? Did it contain the soul of their dead lover? Yeah, I mean the Holy Avenger. A paladin with a Holy Avenger or whatever. There should really be a story behind that. In fact, one of our characters, Sky, has been searching from day one for literally a lightning katana. That's what he told me he wanted. I was like, a lightning katana. So talk about this. So I've made him go on multiple side missions, and the most recent of which is he has to go barter with storm giants to get this lightning katana in the way that he wants it. So that again, it's gonna be his item. But he also named his swords initially. He in fact it's Hope and Flames, which he's not on tonight. But he had named his sword. He named his sword initially. It was he takes great care in the narrative elements behind his character too. So what's the sad barbarian? Barbarian and their axe. Now, having said all this, Tales of the Harrowed Land functions very differently. Like for those of you who have played it, weapons in and of themselves don't do a whole lot. They are more or less an augmentation to your character. They add to your attack power, and that's kind of it. There are items within the game that are powerful. There are magical foci and magical other things to augment magical abilities. Snake sitting on your shoulders, right? Was your magic snake energy, naga inspired being? Is that a magic item? Effectively, it augmented your character. It reacted in certain ways, just like the mask that you were toting around. To me, that it's almost its own personality. It's almost its own, and it had its own agenda. I mean, again, that falls in that territory of items, of mythic items that had been created by this eldritch demonic race, and it was trying to get back to them. So in that game, that's kind of how magic items function. Your average, or they're not average, they're not very common, but your spellcaster, your sorcerer spellcaster can do things that are extremely powerful. So, okay. Why do I see a punchline to this coming? All right, well that's cool, and that's kind of what we've talked about in making items special and progressive items, in items that mutate and change along with you. And in fact, that's something I have thought about for Tails. I haven't worked up a system for it because I have enough to do, but that could be something that appears as a supplementary. Well, I do start off with items of power, where you start off an item of power as a gift, but it doesn't necessarily grow with you. But I definitely could see coming up with a system where you can effectively the role of your character, the stories your character tells helps shape this item. I think that would fit well into the world. I thought you were gonna say like, because you said it was sad. I thought you were gonna say like it contained the soul of their dead lover or one of their dead parents or something. That would be kind of this morbid method of introducing this. So what else we got? Run a good gamut. Oh, there it is. Licks the barbarian and does it was a pet mimic. Oh, that's rather funny. That's cool. Okay. Boy, that would be so upsetting to so many players. I wish I'd thought of that. But wouldn't he be more upset he had a pet mimic this whole time and didn't even realize it? I mean, that would be like if Blood Drinker turned out to be like, I don't know, Asmodeus or something. I've had this demon lord as a pet the whole time, and I couldn't I didn't know it. This devil lord, sorry, Asmodeus is the devil. This devil lord as a whole time, and I didn't know it. That's funny. Mimics are great. I mean, I don't. Let's see. Geese items are fun. Well, right, and that ties into some of these historic magic items and literary magic items, where that there it more or less has its own agenda, and I don't think that's out of place either. I think what a lot of this discussion comes down to, which I find to be a common theme in all of our chats, is how much of an investment in the narrative is your group of players willing to put forth. You know, do they want the experience of these items being special and really giving texture to the world and history of the world, or do they want that weapon that can hurt this creature? And like everything else we talk about here, I think the culture has really changed in the past 10 years as to what people want out of role playing games. Whereas I think everybody here would rather an item that had a story and was really interesting than an item with a lot of power. I mean, a lot of power is always nice, but. And by the way, when it comes to magic items to start in any of your more traditional fantasy games, does anyone think about that? Giving them out to start. Do people make it a habit? Family heirloom. Yeah, that's something I think we did that with a couple of the magic items in our D&D game where people started them because they've been passed down. Or even non-magic items. Again, Lauren, who has Blood Drinker, I believe her loot was also given to her by her father, who was a bard. Coat of arms. Two extra arms that were usable. Okay, that's cool. So I do tend to give out items. I try to start characters out with one item or two items that makes sense for the character. But yeah, if it's not something that's common, fixed or empowered later. So yeah, I'll often give, like, let's say, um, a common suit of leather armor. And again, I don't even necessarily need to say it's magic. I can sometimes say that it is just really well crafted and been handed down to them, or when they became a ranger of a particular order of rangers, they're granted this armor, something like that. I have given out a few more powerful items to start, but like everyone else here, I say it really has to be part of the story of the character. And yeah, maybe having something that could be empowered or granted later on would be cool to start. All right, friends. I think I'm going to start moving to the wrap up. Any other thoughts? Thoughts on our talk tonight? It was a good talk. Yeah, it's great discussion as usual. And again, thanks to everybody for coming. It's very valuable to me that to have people really get invested in this, and it's great that it's growing. Every week I pick up a few new people, and that's wonderful. All right, as always, thank you very much. Thanks for tuning in. Great feedback. And we will chat in the future. Next week, I'll announce next week's topic sometime early next week. And don't forget, see you later. And don't forget that I do stream during the day if you happen to be around. I might be on for a little bit tomorrow. I'm not sure yet, but I do have a schedule set up where I'm doing some work sessions and doing Q&A and stuff like that during the day. So, see y'all later. Have a good night.